I can still recall my first encounter with Grayson, as if it had just been yesterday. I was enjoying the least expensive cup of coffee available at a little dive cafe, attempting to put my disorganized ideas into order and choose my life's next course. Then he entered abruptly. It was almost like a movie scenario. However, there was no background music or dramatic lighting. The only sounds were the doorbell ringing, the smell of his cologne, and the combination of old coffee. "Is this seat already occupied?" With a smile that could make anyone fall to their knees, he pointed to the chair opposite from me and asked, but I kept my calm. My heart was pounding. "I think it's free," I said, attempting to avoid coming across as agitated by his sudden arrival. As soon as we began talking, it was as though we were molded from the same mold. He enjoyed all of the oddball things I did, such as binge-watching corny TV series and debating the finest pizza topping, pine, by the way, which he vehemently supported. After a little while, we were no longer merely passing acquaintances. I felt as though I had known him my entire life, and we were actually dating. We were discussing marriage before we even realized it. Things became tricky at that point. His parents were a very different matter. It was like entering a lion's cave when I first met them. They seemed to be assessing your value while simultaneously grinning at you, as though they were determining whether you were worth their time. "Grayson can't stop talking about you then," his mother inquired in a kind but apprehensive tone that unnerved me. "As accused, I am guilty," I said, attempting to control my emotions despite her rudeness becoming annoying. They quickly established their guidelines, stating unequivocally that Grayson and I had to sign a prenuptial agreement. I don't need anyone's money, and I'm not a gold digger, but I didn't like the way they approached it. I firmly said, "I'll sign your prenuptial agreement. I do have one requirement, though. The other $200,000 is paid to the cheater if one of us cheats." Grayson appeared as though I had just given him a slap. "I would never cheat on you, darling," he stated gravely, and with wide eyes. Yes, just before I caught him in the act, my ex-partner stated the same thing. I retaliated, emphasizing that this was not negotiable. This or nothing, then. Although they didn't appear pleased, Johnny and his parents grudgingly consented. They pretended to have recently ingested something unpleasant. We believed the drama would finish there, but oh, were we mistaken. We had intended to replace our old worn-out couch 100 times, but we never did since it had become our spot, and one evening we were snuggled up on it. Even though the TV was on, we weren't really paying attention. We were too preoccupied with planning an Italian vacation, which we knew we couldn't afford but were eager to do. "Grayson, consider it. The cuisine, wine, and artwork. We must leave." My eyes glowed with anticipation as I spoke. He drew me in as he chuckled. "I was captivated by your meal, Tessa darling. Let's be honest, though. Our bank account is more used for backyard camping than for a romantic trip to Venice." I gave him a light-hearted shove. "So we'll put money aside. We will reduce unnecessary spending. I'm not familiar with your video games, for example." He acted like he was appalled. "Not the video games. Take my coffee machine, my shoes, and my clothing. Not the games, though." We chuckled. We were like that. Always having huge dreams, but keeping a realistic perspective. Nothing ostentatious was necessary for our happiness. The little things, like Grayson preparing breakfast on Saturdays, brought us happiness. Despite his inability to cook, he managed to perfect the art of making toast and scrambled eggs, which were served with a side of awful coffee. I still adore those mornings, though. "Hey, today I'm thinking of scrambled eggs. What are your thoughts?" He was on his way to the kitchen when he inquired, "Only if you swear that this time you won't burn the toast. The perfect back addition. I'm also brewing the coffee. One day." At last, the subject we had been teasing arose. We were washing dishes together, a routine chore that felt unique since we were doing it next to one other. The cozy stillness was broken by Tessa Grayson's statement, "We must discuss starting a family." With a dish still in my hand, I stopped. "I understand, but isn't it frightening? What if we are unable to?" Drying his hands on a towel, Grayson turned to face me. "After that, we'll deal with it together. But unless we try, we won't know, right? How difficult can it be?" "Really?" I chuckled. A mixture of anxiety and affection erupting. "Babe," famous final words. However, it was our specialty. Together, we overcame anything life threw at us. We were able to shrug it off even when his mother began making overt references to her grandkids whenever she could. "Sweetheart, Tessa, when will you have grandchildren for me?" she would say. Her message was anything but sweet, yet her voice was brimming with tenderness. "You know you're not growing any younger." I would bite my tongue and force a grin. "Grayson, aren't we working on it?" He would constantly leap to my defense. "Yes, calm down, Mom. These things require time." That's just the way it was with us. Together, we handled everything calmly. As the year continued to drag, the pressure began to build, not only from Marlo, Grayson's mother, but also from within our own hearts. We had a strong desire to start a family, but it wasn't going as smoothly as we had thought. Our house has been a battleground ever since Marlo discovered her new pastime of making my life miserable, and she preferred to use her piercing, merciless tongue as a weapon. What had started off as the odd insult had become a regular attack on my self-esteem and my wifely duty. On what should have been a calm and relaxed Sunday, things reached a breaking point during lunch. We had hardly sat down when Marlo, with her excellent sense of poor timing, unexpectedly arrived. As soon as she walked through the door, the mood became tight. She looked around the room as if she were going to do a military examination. "This is pretty comfy, isn't it?" she began, her eyes darting over the straightforward dinner I had made, her voice brimming with irony. "Tessa, you've truly surpassed yourself. You've been working diligently in the kitchen all morning, I can tell." For a moment, her eyes locked with me. A self-satisfied smile lifted the corners of her mouth. I made an effort to grin, resolved to maintain harmony. "Marlo, it's nothing special. Just something simple and fast. Have a seat, please." However, she immediately got into her typical pattern as soon as we were seated. "You know, Tessa," she replied in a condescending tone. "Mrs. Henderson told me that her grandchild was recently born during our conversation the other day." It made me pause and reflect. "When can I expect to hear positive news from you and Grayson? You're not exactly getting any younger." My cheeks was flushed with a mixture of fury and shame. I quietly begged Grayson for assistance as I looked at him, but he became quite engrossed in his plate. "Mom." "Come on," Grayson said feebly. However, we were all aware that it was a half-hearted attempt. Marlo continued. "Grayson and unrelenting. I'm not trying to be harsh, but you're not a charity, dear. You earn your money via hard effort. A cleaner and a chef would be far more effective, so why spend money on Tessa when she can't even do her fundamental responsibilities as a wife? Do you not think?" I lost my temper at that point. I was at my breaking point. "Marlo, here, I'm doing my best. Not that I don't want children." I was also unaware that marriage constituted a service agreement, which affected the house and my cooking. Marlo laughed. "However, it's also not a freebie. Tessa, you have obligations." The tension in the room was high, and I could feel tears burning the back of my eyes once you're obviously not living up to it. But quiet and grace were more painful than Marlo's ruthless remarks. When he did speak, his words hurt much more. "Yes, Mom is right. Perhaps we ought to consider enlisting some assistance here. It would simplify things for both of you. Simpler for me." His remarks stabbed me in the back. I was fighting this battle alone, and it was becoming painfully obvious. Marlo visited more often over the next few days, and her criticism sharpened with each visit. She would point out any small flaw as she inspected every inch of the house. "Do you think this is clean?" She would laugh. "This looks like a pigsty, so I guess my eyes are deceiving me." Then the insults about my looks started. "Do you have on that outfit? A wife should dress to please her husband, you know. It makes sense why Grayson is constantly exhausted. This is what he must return home to." I made an effort to defend myself. "I don't dress for Grayson, Marlo. I dress for myself. He works hard, which is why he is exhausted. It's not because of my attire." However, it was akin to speaking with a brick wall. Nothing I said would change Marlo's mind about me. She already had it. Not even Marlo's incessant criticism was the worst. Grayson's refusal to support me was the cause. We would argue after each of her visits. "Grayson, why won't you defend me? You're just allowing her to start walking all over us. She is elderly." Tessa spoke in her own words. "You want me to do what? Throw out my own mother?" "No, All I want is for you to be my husband and support me, not her. It was becoming obvious that Marlowe's disapproval was not the only factor at play here. It had to do with our marriage, whether we would allow Marlowe's scathing remarks to split us apart, or if we were resilient enough to stand together. I became aware that this wasn't merely a phase as the days stretched into weeks. We had the impression that we were besieged, and there might not be anything left to save if we don't take action quickly. Since Marlowe had intensified her campaign of criticism, things had cooled off between Grayson and me. However, the tension at home wasn't the only factor. Grayson had begun to behave strangely, and not in the way that one might expect from a stressful job. Something more profound, something that made my stomach turn. The phone calls were the first step. When it came to his phone, Grayson had always been fairly transparent. We didn't have any secrets, but lately, whenever he received a call, he would leave the room, and the caller ID would always display the same name. John. Work. Who is John? Work? One evening, I asked in a light-hearted manner. Grayson winced. It was obvious he was nervous. Oh, there's a new guy at work. You know, lots of questions. However, it didn't end there. Grayson, who had never given much thought to his appearance, began to take notice of his attire. The faded jeans and old graphic t-shirts were no more. Now it was cologne, slacks, and clean button-up shirts. Cologne was on him, right now. He'd cared about department store smells since when? As I watched Grayson get ready one morning, I pondered. The cologne, the new clothes, and the unexpected focus on his appearance. He wasn't like that. Why the new appearance? Did Grayson get an interview for a job? I tried to be light-hearted when I joked, but I couldn't help but feel uneasy. He smirked a little too quickly. I simply wanted to make a change. That shouldn't hurt, right? But the changes weren't just about his clothes. The late nights at work were becoming more frequent. He texted me another long one. Babe, sorry. This project's killing me. Won't be late, I promise. But the clock would tick past midnight, and I'd still be waiting, pretending everything was fine. I tried to dismiss it, convincing myself it was just work, stress. But the feeling that something was wrong clung to me like a shadow. That's when I did something I never thought I'd do. I hired a private detective. It felt surreal, like something out of a bad TV show. But I had to know the truth. When the envelope arrived, I stared at it for what felt like hours before I finally opened it. The contents were as heartbreaking as they were damning photos of Grayson with another woman, their intimacy undeniable. In each frame, they looked happy, wrapped up in a world that didn't include me. But it wasn't just the photos. The recording was the real dagger. I listened to their conversations filled with endearments and plans. They weren't just having an affair. They were in love. Or at least Grayson was in love with her. I sat there. The facts stretched out in front of me, my heart breaking piece by piece. This was it. The proof that may fracture our marriage and anchor me in a messy divorce should have come to that. But I wasn't ready to confront him. Not yet. I needed a plan, a method to manage this debris with my dignity intact. For days, I carried the secret like a heavy stone, pretending everything was normal. Grayson maintained his game, and I played the role of the perfect wife, smiling, cooking, cleaning, all while the weight of the reality crushed me from the inside. Our talks became scripted, each syllable measured precisely. We danced around the elephant in the room, thinking everything was normal. Everything okay? Have you been silent recently? One evening, Grayson inquired, his worry seeming nearly real. Yes, simply exhausted. Work has been quite hectic. I said a falsehood. On my tongue, the words are harsh. Until it wasn't, it was simply another day. I heard conversations as I walked past Grayson's office. I hesitated, the door ajar a little. Grayson and his mother, Marlowe, were there. It was not a casual discussion. It was thick, with a deeper undertone. Mom, I'm telling you that I'm at my breaking point. It's not only the children. I no longer have any affection for Tessa. We seem more like housemates than husband and wife. Grayson's voice sounded worn out and strained. Marlowe responded scathingly, her voice brimming with her customary contempt. You feel that way, of course. You don't have a child from her. What else has she contributed to this marriage, let's face it? But let's take our time. We wouldn't want to miss out on a thoughtful present from her on my 68th birthday, would we? Her cynicism made my stomach turn like a dagger. They were conspiring against me, utilizing me until it came time to get rid of me. Grayson's tone became calculating and icy. And we can throw her out the window after we receive that lovely, pricey present, right? Yes, sweetheart. Despite her time, Marlowe's voice was full with venom as she affirmed, a bit more extended. I was still as I stood. I was nothing more than a throwaway object, and they were organizing my departure from this family like it was a grocery list. Along with the profound hurt, there was a strong desire for vengeance. They believed they could take advantage of me and discard me. They were mistaken. In this perverse game, I was more than simply a pawn. I was determined to prove to them just how strong I was. A few days later, over a family meal, Marlowe mentioned her impending birthday with her trademark smile. "What are you doing for my birthday, Tessa, my love?" "I'm hoping for something extraordinary." My face was a mask of serenity as I met her gaze. "In fact, Marlowe, I was considering hosting you for dinner at the most exclusive establishment in town. An unforgettable night." She gave Grayson a brief, contented glance as her eyes glowed with want. They believed they had me in a tight spot. They had no idea that I was already 2 steps ahead of them. "That sounds great, Tessa." In an artificially charming voice, Marlowe continued, "Just close family, you know, to keep it intimate." "Naturally." "Marlowe, it will be enjoyable for us," I answered, the words stinging my mouth like venom. It felt like a steady march toward my own D-Day in the weeks before Marlowe's 68th birthday. Every arrogant remark from her and every unconcerned shrug from Grayson strengthened my determination. Straight out of a movie host, the strategy was straightforward yet daring. A sumptuous supper disguised as a kind gesture. Then reveal the secret. The stress at home was evident the night before the celebration. Grayson was sitting on the couch, browsing through his phone, totally unaware of what was going on. "Are all plans in place for tomorrow?" Without even looking up, he asked. "You may say that. I see." I answered in a composed tone that belied the boiling tempest within of me. On the day of the celebration, the air was charged with excitement as people crowded into the opulent dining room I had rented. My heart pounded due to the adrenaline pulsing through me, not nervousness. As usual, Marlowe showered accolades on the eatery, relishing the limelight. "You've surpassed yourself, Tessa." She shouted loud enough for everyone to hear. "This place is exquisite." As the lunch went on, the laughing became hollow, and the talk strained. I knew what was going to happen, though, so I played along. The server approached me discreetly with the bill as the dessert plates were removed. $66,000, he muttered without hesitation. I gave my card to them. Most people didn't see the gesture. Grayson felt it was time to make his move just as a smirk appeared on his face. "Tessa," he said in a chilly, disinterested tone, "I believe it's time for everyone to be aware. I've had enough of this. Of us." Although there had been tension between us for months, I was unprepared for Grayson's announcement. His words hung in the air like a poisonous cloud. I want a divorce. The room was filled with an oppressive quiet as it sucked out the sounds. For a minute, I remained still as my mind raced to comprehend the significance of a sentence. Marlowe, who is always quick to twist the knife, added before I could reply. "Since that's publicly known, Tessa, I believe it would be best for you to leave. You are no longer a part of our family celebration tonight." There was a deathly silence in the room. Everyone looked at me, anticipating the inevitable breakdown. However, I stood with a peace I didn't really feel, rather than collapsing. I nodded silently and left the only life I had known for years behind. Feeling the chilly night air hit me as I did so. It was a big step home. Sinking in was the truth of what had just transpired. A plan had already started to take shape in my head by the time I arrived at his flat. Tears had no place here, no space for sadness. I packed hastily, chilled by the icy determination that had descended upon me. One life came to an end, and another began at this point. My phone was vibrating nonstop while I sipped from the final suitcase. At first, I chose to ignore it, but as my curiosity got the better of me, I noticed Marlowe's name flashing on the screen, along with her piercing, annoying voice. filled my ear right away. The payment didn't go through, Tessa. Now is the time to remedy this. How ironic that I'm getting ready for the inevitable. Knowing that the shared account would be the first thing Grayson would attempt to use against me, I had blocked it. I gave the words time to register, enjoying the situation, then calmly responding. That's bad, Marlo, but you'll have to work this one out since, as you so beautifully stated, I'm no longer a member of the family. Her comments screeched with venom as her wrath erupted over the phone. But that was melody to me. I could already see the restaurant going into disarray, with Marlo having tantrums, the staff demanding money, and finally the cops showing there to put an end to the situation. My marriage had devolved into a charade, and it was a suitable conclusion. With the divorce papers in hand, I made a final trip back to the house we had shared the next morning. I could feel the tension in the air as soon as I walked through the door. Even though Grayson and Marlo were already at odds, they united in their animosity when they spotted me. After last night, you're showing some guts by coming here. With a look of incredulity and rage on his face, Grayson spit. But the viper hissed in accord with Marlo. Ungrateful wretch. In front of the entire city, you made us seem foolish. You have no idea how embarrassing it was to have the police arrive. People were filming and giggling. I calmly faced their rage. Honestly, I didn't feel ashamed. Do you believe that's your main issue at the moment? The divorce papers were thrown onto the table by me. On top are the damaging pictures of Grayson's affair. This is what you should be more worried about. When Grayson picked up the pictures, his face became white. Peering over his shoulder was Marlo. As the truth of their predicament struck in, their rage gave way to astonishment and finally terror. Not to mention the prenuptial agreement. Should we? My voice was frigid. You are dishonest. You pay exactly $100,000. A grimace distorted Marlo's face. You wouldn't risk it. This cannot be done to us. Yes. But I will, and I can. When Grayson saw how serious the situation was, he changed strategies. Let's speak about this, please. We are able to repair it. I couldn't resist laughing, letting forth a sour sound from my throat. Make it right. You believe that a few words will be enough to reverse everything? No, Grayson. It's finished. Marlo experimented with her own deceit. She exuded phony worry as her voice grew softer. Think about what you're doing, Tessa, my dear. We shall be ruined by this. With unyielding resolution, I gazed at her. The ship has set sail. Marlo, you ought to have considered that before. Their entreaties were more urgent. However, I had already decided. I had had enough of being their pawn. Grayson was forced to borrow money from his parents in order to pay me in the end. Check in hand, I walked out of the house for the final time. I experienced a sudden lightness. I was at last free with the settlement, and the burden of their deception had been discharged. I found a modest but comfortable apartment of my own. It was mine, even if it wasn't very fancy. Every crevice serves as a haven from the turmoil of my former existence. I enjoyed the tranquil pace of life now. My work kept me occupied. The neighbors were friendly and waved to one another, and a small garden I could manage to carefully. Occasionally, however, a small piece of information from the past would find its way to me. I ran into a former neighbor the other day when I was getting coffee at a nearby location. Following the customary greetings, they leaned close and spoke conspiratorially. Are you aware of the most recent crisis between your former partner and his mother? I arched an eyebrow. Interest was aroused. I can't say that I must reveal. It was fantastic gossip. Grayson's new girlfriend was apparently having trouble with Marlo. It made my predicament appear easy, because they were fighting like cats and dogs. I couldn't help but feel relieved as I left with my coffee in hand. That kind of news would have sent me into a tailspin, but now it was simply another bit of drama from someone else. My biggest concerns these days are whether I'll ever learn yoga without appearing like a newborn deer on ice, or if my tomatoes will mature before the squirrels get to them. On this side of turmoil, life is easier, more peaceful, and immensely sweeter. Story 2. I had no intention of concealing my accomplishments. When others think you have nothing to give, life has a strange way of showing them who you really are. I'm Emma Chin, and I've always understood that looks may be deceiving. I witnessed my parents work 14-hour days to put food on the table and give me a chance at success. as I grew up in a small apartment above their little grocery business in Chinatown, San Francisco. I was formed by their lessons. Character and tenacity are more important indicators of true value than material prosperity. My tendu rattles in, Emma. Were you able to weigh? As she fixed my collar each morning, my mother would say. Her labor-weary hands were as soft as silk. Every day presents a fresh chance. I helped stock shelves, studied inventory management, and combed through accounting books while my classmates watched TV or played video games. My faithful friend and toy was my father's old calculator. But I took in the spirit of their work in addition to the numbers. No matter how much a consumer can spend, treat them with respect. Be a family to everyone. You never know their story, my father used to remark. Their sacrifices paid off. On the day I received my admission letter, my father closed the store early for the first time in 20 years, and my mother sobbed when I was awarded a full scholarship to Stanford's business school. We feasted on my mother's famous red bean soup and dumplings to celebrate. In between classes, I worked tirelessly at Stanford, applying the fortitude my parents had taught me. I created a novel supply chain management system that attracted the attention of Genesis Tech, a new powerhouse in Silicon Valley. Global distribution could change as a result of your method. Their CEO, Marcus Sterling, stated at my last presentation, "After you graduate, we would love to have you join us." The deal exceeded my expectations, a high-level role with substantial stock options. Marcus was taken aback when I asked to begin in operations instead. As at my parents' store, I had to learn the business from the ground up. The majority of individuals like to begin at the top, Marcus said. His interest was aroused. I said, I want to earn it. If I don't know the fundamentals, how can I lead? I'm impressed, he said. Few of my co-workers were aware of my actual title, which was Senior Vice President of Operations. I liked a secret. I met James that way. I was absorbed in inventory reports one soggy Tuesday morning in the office cafeteria when someone bumped into my table, almost spilling my coffee. Oh no. I'm so sorry. A tall, good-looking man with a chef tie fumbled to keep the cup steady. I promise that my coordination is typically better. I laughed in response. Nothing was harmed. My name is Emma James. Wilson. James. Something inside of me was pulled by his warm grin. Let me compensate you. I'll pay for the coffee. Lunch followed by supper after one coffee. We were inseparable very quickly. James was a marketing professional, and his artistic ability complemented my analytical disposition. He enjoyed hearing about my operations work, always interested in my day. One evening as we walked along the bay, he commented, "You don't only notice issues, you see answers." After 6 months, he proposed. Without hesitation, I answered sure. I didn't meet his mother, Victoria Wilson, until we started organizing a wedding. We met for the first time in their house in Pacific Heights. An homage to old money. From the top of a marble staircase, Victoria welcomed me. Her attitude, I say. So she started looking at me via high-end spectacles. Do you work in operations? The word almost came out of her mouth. Yes, I said evenly, without going into any detail. What about your parents? In Chinatown, they run a food shop. We are small business owners, she said, looking at her spouse. All people must begin somewhere. Squeeze my hand, James, but don't say anything. A warning sign that I choose to overlook. Victoria's overt interference and subtle jabs became commonplace in the weeks before our wedding. She insisted on planning everything and disregarded my preferences as beautifully straightforward. She would touch my hand like she was comforting a kid and say, "Darling, let people who are aware of these things do it." Even my wedding gown. An argument arose over a contemporary design with traditional Chinese accents. But Francis, wouldn't you rather have something more suitable at the street? I firmly respond, this is appropriate. It respects both cultures. Her lips were pursed. Well, I guess it's up to you. However, Caroline, James's first girlfriend, always possessed such taste. European. You know, James remained silent once again. The wedding was lovely in spite of Victoria's meddling. The front row was occupied by my parents. Their eyes were gleaming with tears. Victoria presided over her bridge group in the meanwhile, entertaining them with stories of James's successful cousins. Not everyone gets married, of course. I heard her say that, her voice brimming with contempt. The stress didn't go away after the wedding. Victoria's insults persisted, and monthly family dinners turned to become endurance tests. Could you assist the housekeeper in clearing the table, Emma? The kitchen must make you feel more comfortable, or James. Caroline recently become a partner at her legal practice. When people realize their full potential, isn't it inspiring? Victoria stressed that everyone who mattered will be there for the lavish holiday meal she announced by Christmas. Everyone who is important. I repeated, indeed. Okay, you know what family is. James remained silent as he gazed into his wine glass. Victoria had no idea how her Christmas supper would challenge her preconceptions in unexpected ways. That's a tale for another time, though. At precisely 6 Guy, we reached the Wilson residence. As usual, Victoria had not cut any corners. Through the frosted windows, I had a glimpse of the dining room, which resembled a luxury magazine cover with towering flower arrangements and glistening crystal. The 3-story exterior was decked with thousands of dazzling white lights, and the front entrance was adorned with a huge wreath with a gold bow. Victoria, Emma, and James welcomed us. Her grin was as icy and refined as the cutlery within. She was dressed in a sophisticated designer gown that was definitely more costly than what she thought I would make in a year. James, sweetheart, the living room is where everyone is gathering. Emma, you might be able to help out in the kitchen with the snacks. James started, but I gave him a quick pat on the arm. It's okay, I responded in a composed tone. A smug smile twisted Victoria's lips. Very thoughtful. She's always eager to help out, which is what we adore about her, James. I was left alone in the hallway as James followed her into the living room with a feeble giggle. I discovered Maria, the Wilsons' 15-year maid, leading a tiny staff with the accuracy of a commander in the kitchen. Her eyes lit up with a loving grin as she saw me. What are you doing in here, Mrs. Emma, are you a visitor? Apparently not. I smiled wryly in response. Nevertheless, I rolled up my sleeves and started assisting her with setting out the canapes of smoked salmon. As more guests arrived, Victoria's ecstatic cries were heard after the doorbell chimed once more. One voice stood out among the others. When it came time for dinner, Maria and I carried the appetizers into the formal dining room, where Caroline, James's ex-girlfriend, had somehow managed to make it onto the guest list. The scene that met my eyes was just as magnificent as I had envisioned. Every seat at the enormous table, which could accommodate 24 people, was marked with name cards in Victoria's flowing calligraphy and adorned with Waterford crystal and antique silver. I circled the table, looking around for my name. It was absent. Emma, I see. Victoria's voice came out, fox-concerned and syrupy. We're a little crowded at the main table. You understand? I'm sure. Family comes first. How about we go into the kitchen with Maria? It looks like you two get along great. There was silence in the room. Everyone looked at me, some uneasy, some interested. Caroline's glass of champagne barely covered her smirk. Richard, James's father, cleared his throat. We might be able to accommodate another chair. Nonsense, Victoria said with ease. Emma is aware that she's accustomed to more relaxed environments. Even though my cheeks were burning, I tried to look neutral. I had learned the importance of maintaining composure from years of managing difficult negotiations. Naturally, Victoria. Whatever makes you comfortable. I was about to walk away when I noticed James's eyes. He looked uneasy, but said nothing. Something inside me hardened. Back in the kitchen, Maria wrung her hands. Mrs. Emma, this isn't right. Let me speak to Mrs. Wilson. It's fine, I said, pulling out my phone and sending a quick text. I sat at the small kitchen table and opened my laptop. At least let me fix you a plate, Maria insisted. Thank you, Maria, but I have some urgent work to handle. A major supply chain issue. I offered a reassuring smile as I reviewed the data Marcus had sent. The problems in Asia were more severe than I'd hoped, but not insurmountable. From the dining room came the sound of laughter and clinking glasses. Victoria's voice floated above the rest, recounting tales from James's childhood. Caroline chimed in with anecdotes from their high school days. 20 minutes passed, then 30. The doorbell rang again. Maria moved to answer it, but I stopped her. That's for me. I opened the door to find Marcus Sterling, CEO of Genesis Tech, standing in his signature tailored suit. A look of mild concern on his face. Emma. He greeted me warmly. Apologies for intruding on your Christmas dinner, but we need your input on the Asia situation. Of course, I said, gesturing for him to come in. Though technically I'm not at the dinner table. His brow furrowed. Not at the table, why not? Why don't we find out together? We walked into the dining room where the hum of conversation stopped abruptly. 24 heads swiveled toward us. Curiosity and confusion etched on their faces. Victorious too quickly, her expression hard to read. I'm so sorry, sir. The help isn't supposed to let visitors in unannounced. Emma, you should know better. Marcus blinked, then turned to me. Help! I'm confused. Why is my senior vice president of operations eating in the kitchen? The silence was deafening. Victoria's face drained of color. Senior vice president. Indeed. Marcus said, oblivious to or perhaps enjoying the tension. Emma's leadership has been pivotal to Genesis Tech's success. Her supply chain system is groundbreaking. Surely her husband has mentioned her accomplishments. All eyes turned to James, who looked like he might faint. I didn't know, he stammered. You never asked. I said quietly. Caroline's champagne flute slipped from her hand, shattering against the hardwood floor. No one moved to clean it up. But you work in operations, Victoria sputtered. You said I do, I replied, my tone calm. As the senior vice president, I chose to start at the ground level, just as my parents did in their modest grocery store. Marcus nodded approvingly. Speaking of which, Emma, your mother's dumplings are extraordinary. The board loved them. At our last meeting, Victoria collapsed into her chair, her shock plain. Board meetings? Yes, Marcus continued. Emma's one of our youngest board members. Her stock options alone are worth. Marcus, I interjected gently. Perhaps we should handle the Asia situation elsewhere. I wouldn't want to disrupt the family dinner. I turned to Victoria, my gaze steady. Thank you for making my place in this family so abundantly clear. It's helped me make some important decisions. Emma, wait, Jane said, finally standing. We need to talk about this. We do? I agreed, but not tonight. Tonight I have a company to run. As I left, I paused. Oh, and Victoria. Those dumplings you dismissed last month. They were a hit at our last gala. $200 per plate. Quite the success with the governor. Marcus and I walked out into the crisp night air as we approached his car. He glanced at me. I've been wondering how long you've let them treat you like that. I smiled faintly. Sometimes it's better to let people show you who they really are. And James. That's a decision for another day. As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed relentlessly with messages from James, from Richard, even one from Caroline. But the one from Victoria stood out. And my dear, I think there's been a misunderstanding. I turned off my phone. Adrian needed my attention, and my life needed a fresh perspective. As my mother always said, each day is a new opportunity, and tonight I'd seized mine. The next morning, I woke up in my private office at Genesis Tech. The resolution to the Asia crisis neatly tucked away in my outbox. A late-night video conference with our Shanghai partners and decisive action had steered the company away from disaster. As sunlight poured through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a knock on the door pulled me from my thoughts. Mrs. Chen, Sarah, my assistant, peeked in. Your husband is in the lobby again. This is his third attempt since dawn. I sighed and glanced at my phone. 47 missed calls, 93 texts, and an avalanche of emails. Victoria alone had sent 28 increasingly frantic messages. Send him up, Sarah. It's time we talked. When James walked in, he looked nothing like his usual polished self. His hair was messy, his shirt wrinkled, and his tie was nowhere to be seen. His eyes darted around the room, taking in the sleek office, the awards on the walls, and the panoramic view of the bay. Emma, he began, his voice hesitant. This is really your office. For the last 2 years, I answered, motioning for him to seat. Not that you ever asked. He sank into one of the visitor chairs, his gaze dropping. I don't comprehend. Why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? That I'm more than the girl your mother looks down on. That I've developed a career while you stood by and said nothing. When precisely was I expected to do that, James? In between your mother's barbs or your silence? He winced. Mom's difficult. I repeated, crossing my arms. She made me eat in the kitchen on Christmas, and you allowed her? I was about to say anything, but you didn't. You never do. My voice was calm, yet forceful. James, 2 years. You've been laughing at your mother's jokes about my history for the past 2 years. She paraded Caroline in front of me for 2 years without saying a word. You've been embarrassed of me for 2 years, or at least what you believed me to be. He objected. I wasn't ashamed. You weren't. So why did you inquire about my job at all? How come you didn't come see me here? Why didn't you stand up for me? I heard my phone beep before he could respond. Marcus. The screen displayed his name. Your Asia plan was accepted by the board. The stock is up 12% already, he noted. Fantastic work. Thank you, Marcus. Today I will complete the chronology. James's face was white as he glanced at me when I hung up. Marcus Sterling is your immediate supervisor. For years, I have... With a tone, I said. As a matter of fact, do you recall how I had to work extra last Christmas and missed your mother's party? I was completing a $1 billion deal in Tokyo, but you thought I was at a warehouse working a shift. I had no idea, Emma, he begged. Give me another opportunity, please. I gave a headshake. James, that's the issue. You want to put things right now that you know you were unsuccessful? What about the time you believed me to be merely a girl from the grocery store? Then, didn't I deserve respect? It was deafeningly quiet between us, and I discovered my solution in it. We were stopped by a knock on the door. Sarah reappeared with an uneasy expression. Mrs. Wilson is here, Mrs. Chen. She is adamant. I gave a nod. Victoria's center swooped in, looking as sharp as ever, but without her typical poise. Her gaze darted across the room, enlarging as it saw my qualifications and honors. Emma, sweetheart, she said in a sticky, sweet voice. We must resolve this miscommunication. Miscommunication. I raised an eyebrow. Do you mean the place where you forced me to eat in the kitchen, or where you treated me like a subordinate for 2 years? Her mouth was like a fish out of water, opening and closing. I was unaware of your identity. And that's the crux of the issue, I added scathingly. You make assumptions about me based on my parents' supermarket. How much do you believe Genesis Tech spent on my supply chain system, Victoria? She floundered and blinked. I don't. $300 million prior to my graduation. I learned a lot about hard work and respect from the small shop. Ideas that you still don't understand. Emma James spoke out. Individuals are subject to change. Give us an opportunity to correct this. My lawyer sent me an email when I opened my laptop. 2 years. James has provided you with many opportunities. I looked him in the eye. I'm going to file for divorce. Victoria let out a gasp. You are unable to consider James's future. Mine is, and I am. I agreed to the prenuptial agreement you demanded. It safeguards my possessions just as well as his, and the home in Pacific Heights. Last year, I purchased it. Examined the property's documentation. James recoiled in disbelief. I was creating something genuine all this time, while you let your mother to disparage me. On my desk, I clicked a button. Please take Mrs. Wilson out, Sarah. James, you need to relocate your belongings to your parents' house by Friday. Emma, consider the opinions of others. When security showed up, Victoria yelled. What I ought to have stated years ago, they'll say. A bank account does not garner respect. Treating people with dignity is how you earn it. I looked across at James. Your mother tried to minimize me for 2 years. She was only able to demonstrate her little size to me. I watched the fog sweep across the bay from the window as they departed. My mother's SMS message showed up on my phone. Deja vu and my 2 handshakes. Every day presents a fresh chance. Grinning, I wrote a press statement regarding the success of the Genesis passage. That day, the stock would close at a record high. However, the stats didn't reflect my actual success. It was in the knowledge that I had recovered my sense of value. I closed another quarterly report 6 months later. The divorce was final. Victoria had a new cautionary tale for her bridge club after the house sold. Now none of it mattered. Sarah knocked. Chen, Mrs. We're having lunch with your folks. Grinning, I closed my laptop. The goal of success is not to disprove others. It's about establishing your correctness. And the finest retaliation. In a kitchen, it's not served cold. It's served in a corner office with people who have always recognized your value. Story 3. Madeline is 8 years younger than me, and my name is Heather. My younger sister. Our parents made it obvious that she was something special from the day she was born. Take a look at those stunning green eyes, they would say. Or have you ever seen golden curls this flawless? In the meantime, I watched them swoon over her while standing in the corner with my unremarkable face and boring brown hair. Please understand that I cherished my sister. How could I not? She required continual care and attention because she was such a little, flawless thing. And guess who became her second mother? Both of our parents put in a lot of overtime to make finances meet. Yes, exactly. Me. Honey, Heather. Could you assist Maddie with her schoolwork? Mom would ask. Your arithmetic skills are amazing. Or, please, Heather, could you come get your sister from school? Both of us are stranded at work. I recall a certain night when Madeline was 6 and I was 14. I was attempting to complete my own pile of schoolwork while assisting her with her reading assignment. Madeline pushed the book away and complained, I don't want to read anymore. It's dull. Pulling the book back, I murmured, Come on, Maddie. 3 more pages, please. We may then engage in that game. You enjoy it. Despite her frown, she took up the book once again. Heather, you're no fun. Every day after school, Sarah is taken to the park by her older sister. Sarah's older sister is not required to volunteer at the library after school, though. It ached a little, but I answered. In order to support our family, I was already balancing school, housekeeping, and a part-time job at the local library. Our lives were like that. I was healthy, and Madeline was being herself, whatever it was that everyone wanted me to be. By the age of 16, I was working 3 jobs, online data entry at night, at the library after school, and at a cafe in the morning. Additionally, we were able to pay for Madeline's special tutoring, dancing lessons, and exquisite attire, which helped her become the most popular student in the school. I kept telling myself that things will improve, and that Madeline would eventually realize how much I had done for her. That perhaps, just possibly, our parents might regard me with the same pride they shown while discussing her. However, in retrospect, I see that I was only telling myself what I needed to hear to keep moving forward. I was aware that, unrelated to my academics, I had few alternatives when it came time to apply to colleges. In fact, those were rather nice. Despite working 3 jobs, I had even qualified for many scholarships at out-of-state institutions. You were admitted to Stanford. When the letter arrived, Mom had inquired. Her eyes briefly widened before becoming cloudy. But who would assist Maddie in preparing for college, honey? We are unable to pay for that type of tuition, you know. I recall holding that acceptance letter as I stood there in our kitchen, observing as Madeline's most recent artwork on the refrigerator caught Mom's eye. I kept my offer of a half scholarship to myself. What was the purpose? During my freshman year, I continued to be Madeline's personal support system, continued working at the cafe and library, and enrolled at City College. After rushing to work from my early classes, I would come home and assist Madeline with her schoolwork. On other evenings, I would stay up until 2 a.m., completing my own homework before waking up at 5 o'clock to work in the cafe. I eventually moved into my own apartment after graduating and got a respectable job at an accounting business. It was mine, a little 1-bedroom apartment with erratic plumbing. I hoped that things would be different now. I might be able to start concentrating on my own life now. The phone call regarding Madeline's graduation gown then arrived. Sweetheart. With that typical begging tone in her voice, Mom spoke. You are aware of your sister's importance in this. She must have the ideal appearance for her graduation. The memory of my own graduation gown, a $30 clearance rack find that was just like Jenny Thompson's, caused a sour chuckle to rise in my throat. All night long, I had been attempting to stay out of her pictures. What is her desired price for the dress? I was already grabbing my credit card when I asked. She discovered this stunning designer item, though. It's just $800. My coffee almost suffocated me. $800. That was about a month's worth of rent. However, I heard myself respond, "All right, Mom, I'll send the money over." Then the actual bombshell was dropped. One of the most costly private universities in the state, Preston University, had admitted Madeline. Moreover, our parents had, somehow, managed to save a sizable sum of money for her education. During a family meal, Dad proudly revealed, "We've been saving money since she was born. Our young daughter is entitled to the greatest education available." As I sat there with my fork frozen halfway to my lips, I thought back to all the student loans I still owed, the scholarships I had to decline, and the years I had worked many jobs to pay for my tuition at a public university. While I was saving, they had been saving for Madeline's schooling. However, it didn't end there. After Madeline began working at Preston, the requests began coming in a matter of weeks. "Heather, my dear." One evening, Mom called. "Maddie needs assistance with her flat. Pay the rent, only until she settles in." Textbooks came next, followed by a laptop, since every other student has a MacBook. After that, she got a new iPhone, because the one I had given her the previous year was humiliating. Food. Cash. Clothing. Cash. Every week, Madeline required my assistance for a new cause, a new emergency, or a new expenditure, and throughout everything. Madeline never expressed gratitude. She never once acknowledged what I was giving up for her. I was merely the family's ATM, giving her anything she needed without asking or objecting. My phone rang 3 years later, while I was going over my monthly budget at my kitchen table. Mom sounded strangely excited. On the opposite end, "You should come over now, Heather. Maddie has some exciting news." When I got to my parents' house, Madeline was literally jumping off the walls and showing off a huge diamond ring. "I'm getting married." She let out a squeal. "I'm also graduating from college." Before I found my voice, there was a brief silence in the room. "What are you?" "Oh, Heather, don't seem so surprised." Madeline gave an eye roll. "In any case, college is dull. Jason has a lot of money, and our wedding will be the most spectacular." After all those years of struggle, I felt as though I was underwater. That much money, I just lost my money. Waiting for my parents to say something, anything at all, I stared at them. However, they simply sat there, grinning at Madeline like though she had just said that she had cured cancer. "How about your degree?" I was able to inquire. "Everyone has made a significant investment." "Heather, I'm very sorry. What a buzzkill you are." Madeline cut in. "That's the reason you're still unmarried. You're usually so dull and realistic. For the next hour, allow me to share my wedding ideas with you." As Madeline described her ideal wedding, which would surpass the nuptials of all her friends, I sat there in a stupor. Everything had to be flawless, including the dress, the flowers, and the location, which reportedly meant spending a lot of money. Then the bomb was dropped. Dad cleared his throat and said, "Honey, although we have a loan, it is insufficient. We also need you to contribute since you are a member of the family. Mom done? After all, it's your sister's special day." I asked myself, "How much?" As if I were experiencing an out-of-body sensation. "Your part should be covered by $20,000, Madeline stated nonchalantly, as though she were requesting a $5 loan for coffee. I'm not sure what made me say yes. It may have been habit. Perhaps it was the way the tears filled Mom's eyes. Perhaps it was just simpler than fighting. However, I accepted, and the next day the funds were removed from my account. They weren't finished, though. In fact, dear, during our upcoming family meal, Mom mentioned that we've been considering granting you a modest loan to assist with the additional costs. For once in my life, something broke inside of me. "No," I answered firmly. "Not at all. I'm saving money for a home loan. I also have to consider my future. When did you start being so self-centered?" Madeline's flawless face twisted into an unpleasant frown as she demanded. My hands trembled beneath the table, but I refused to back down. "Maddie, I've handed you $20,000. My limit is that." The ensuing hush was deafening. Then, in that reassuring tone I was so familiar with, Mom spoke out. The least you can do is assist with the arrangements if you are no longer willing to provide financial support. I sat back on my shoulders and nodded, already feeling the usual weight of duty. However, something had changed. I had refused them for the first time in my life. Even though it was a minor triumph, it felt enormous. Those weeks became a nightmare. Madeline's texts, each requesting more money for a new crucial wedding detail, kept buzzing on my phone. I discovered the ideal flowers, Heather. The arrangements barely cost $3,000. They'll give them to another bride if I don't have the money before tomorrow. God. Oh, God. This band is incredible. I must have them. They played at Chelsea's wedding. They want $5,000. Is it possible for you to provide the funds tonight? The location I had in mind is available, but we must pay a deposit now. It's only $8,000. You'll manage it properly? I got a virtual assistant job as a second career, working on the weekends and at night. My days at my accounting work became a never-ending haze of spreadsheets, making wedding plans during my lunch break when I did get one, and then spending more time in front of a computer at night. One day, I was interrupted in the break room by my coworker, Jenny. "Are you all right, Heather? You appear different." I hardly recognized myself when I saw my reflection in the glass. When I lose weight, the dark bags beneath my eyes disappear and hang loosely. I couldn't recall the last time I'd had time to get my hair trimmed, so I quickly pushed it back. Naturally, I answered, "I'm fine." My sister's wedding is keeping me busy. I was ready to fall asleep that night when I climbed into bed at 1 in the morning, my eyes burning from gazing at screens all day. Another message from Madeline appeared on my phone. "For the reception, I have discovered the most incredible ice sculpture. Just $2,500. They'll sell it to someone else if the money isn't made before morning." I buried my face in my pillow and shut off my phone, fighting back tears of tiredness. I had already covered the cost of the band, the venue, the food, and the flowers. How much more is there, perhaps? Mom, after work, wondering what else they may want from me, I dragged myself to their place. I had already maxed up my credit card and depleted my savings account. Knowing that it will soon be over was the only thing that kept me going. Madeline was splayed out on the couch with travel mags all around her when I went in. She was examining a beautiful catalog with her parents, who were sitting close by. "Oh, what a wonderful resort." Madeline pointed to a page with a scream. "Observe the bungalows above the ocean. Additionally, each suite has an own butler." I watched from the doorway as she turned the pages of what seemed like an upscale travel guide. When I knew what was about to happen, my gut nodded. "What am I doing here, exactly?" My voice was hardly steady as I asked. "You needed me to come over, but why?" Madeline's syrupy, sweet grin, which I had come to fear, appeared as she looked up from her magazine. "Oh, we're simply choosing your wedding present." I blinked. "What am I? Your wedding present?" she repeated carefully, as though I was unable to grasp simple English. "I made the decision that you would cover the cost of our Maldivian honeymoon." The room began to swirl. I steadied myself by holding onto the doorframe. "Do you mean me? After I've already paid for everything?" "Come on, Heather," Mom added. "Avoid being theatrical. Is it dramatic?" My voice broke. "All of my money has already been spent on this wedding." "Well," Madeline shrugged, "it's not like you have anything else to spend it on." "It's just $24,000 too." Something broke inside of me. 29 years of being the human ATM, the obliging sister, and the decent daughter. In that instant, everything fell apart. "Just $24,000. I just yelled. "Are you aware of the amount of work I put into your priceless wedding? Do you have any idea?" Dad told Mel to quiet down. "Heather, I'm not going to be quiet. I'm finished. I'm all finished with this." Now I was trembling. Anger that has been suppressed for years is now coming to the surface. "You are nothing more than a conceited, pampered brat, Madeline. Additionally, I'm tired of putting up with your constant demands. I need to think about my own life." An horrible grin distorted Madeline's features. "Your own life? What kind of life? Heather, you're 29. An elderly maid. Have you recently examined yourself in the mirror? Why aren't you dating? You look awful. Why would a typical man desire you?" Like physical strikes. The word struck. However, I refused to back down. I've been working 2 jobs every day to pay for your wedding, which is why I look awful. Your incessant demands have prevented me from getting a full night's sleep in months. Madeline spit out, "You're simply envious. I'm jealous since you'll die alone and I'm getting married. I'm envious since you're just and I'm attractive and prosperous. You." That was it. The dam cracked. Utterly successful. You left the college early. I contributed to the cost. Lovely. As ugly as they come, your soul is. You have never in your life worked a day. No matter what I've done for you, you've never expressed gratitude. You believe that everything in the world is due to you. And what do you know? I've had enough of your conceited little world. Madeline's words trailed behind me as I turned and ran out of the door. No one will ever marry you because you're nothing more than a jealous wet mill wonder. I heard Mom and Dad joining in behind me, screaming insults and accusations at my back. However, I didn't turn around for the first time in my life. I didn't say I was sorry. I refused to give in. My phone was overflowing with texts by the time I arrived home that evening. At least 30 SMS had been sent by Mom, each one more scathing than the previous. You have no right to talk to your sister in that manner. You're nothing more than a self-centered, unappreciative daughter after everything we've done for you. How could you spoil the day for your sister? After staring at the messages until the words were indistinguishable, I took an action I had never taken before. Something freeing and terrible at the same time. I turned on my laptop and began emailing the location. I must withdraw my payment to the florist and cancel the reservation. Kindly cancel the catering company's order for the wedding arrangements. I'm calling off the band's meal service for the next date. Regretfully, I have to cancel each reservation individually. Everything I had planned for Madeline's wedding was methodically undone. My head was clear, but my hands were trembling. I no longer cared that the wedding was just 2 weeks away. I felt lighter with every cancellation. Then everything went haywire. I banned my mother's number, and my phone began to ring constantly. After I prevented her from using Dad's phone, she began using their landline instead. Email, Facebook, Instagram, WhatsApp, and every other medium sent a deluge of messages. They were all blocked by me. "Please give your Aunt Susan a call, Heather." "How come you won't respond?" "Calls from Uncle Jim?" "Rachel, your cousin is furious with you. How could you harm your own sister in this way?" The calls were coming from all directions. Distant family members I hadn't spoken to in a long time. I hardly knew any of my family or acquaintances, even the prospective in-laws of Madeline. I completely stopped picking up my phone. Then came the in-person meetings. The yelling came from underneath my window as I was attempting to fall asleep. "Heather! Now go down here." It was the harsh, irate voice of Mom. "This has to be fixed. You self-centered witch." Madeline was that person. Hours passed while they stood there, alternating between irate demands and heartfelt entreaties. To block them out, I cranked up my TV. I talked to George, the concierge for our building, the next morning. "Don't allow them in, please." Silently, I said, "What people say doesn't matter to me. Here, they are not welcome." George nodded empathetically, having seen their actions the previous evening. "Miss Robertson, don't be concerned. I'll see to that." My buddy Kelly phoned a week later. "Did you hear the news?" With caution, she inquired. "To pay for everything, your parents had to take out another emergency loan. You canceled." Without charging premium fees, none of the suppliers would complete the task at such short notice. They paid nearly twice as much for everything in the end. I sat there and let that to sink in. There was a greater part of me that felt guilty, the part that had been programmed since I was a youngster to handle everything and make sure everyone else was okay. The portion that had at last found its voice was aware that I had made the correct choice. I came upon these while browsing Instagram a month after the incident. The wedding pictures of Madeline. They were there because a mutual acquaintance had liked them, even though I hadn't intended to look. The extravagant wedding that my sister had insisted on had become something else entirely. Simple grocery store flowers had been utilized in place of the $3,000 flower arrangements that had been used in our parents' backyard, a 5-star hotel location. There was a laptop and speakers on a folding table, but no sign of the pricey band. Even though Madeline looked stunning in her fantasy dress, there was something strange about each picture. Her eyes were tight with disappointment, and her smile was forced. There were no honeymoon pictures taken. Along with the rest of her ambitious ambitions, the Maldives dream had perished. For the first time in years, I shut down Instagram and made an effort to move on with my life. I was taking care of myself, getting regular sleep, eating healthily, and even beginning to resemble myself once more. Then my phone rang 3 months after the wedding. Dad was there. Heather. In some way, his voice seemed older and worn out. We must speak. Would you be able to visit? I agreed with him because of something in his tone. It felt different when I got to my folks' place. Sitting on the couch, Mom and Dad were deflated. Dad was the first to speak. Madeline's divorce is imminent. Like smoke, the words lingered in the air. I waited. Jason and her. Mom's voice broke. Since the wedding, they have been at odds. He never stops griping about how humiliating it was that they couldn't even have a legitimate band, and how cheap everything was. The canceled honeymoon has angered him. The problem is, Dad went on, gazing at his hands. 2 loans were taken out for that wedding. We're in quite deep even with the scaled-down version. Before they ever said anything, Heather, I knew what was going to happen. We hoped Mom started. No, I responded firmly and softly. But where are your parents, Heather? I'm your daughter, too. The person for whom you never saved money. The person who put herself through college by working 3 jobs. The one who spent all of her savings on a wedding that never should have happened. In startled stillness, they sat. We were now aware of our partial error. The way we treated you, Dad stated gently. I straightened my skirt and got to my feet. Inaccurate to some extent. In every way, you have been mistaken. Concerning money, Madeline and me. Regarding life. Perhaps one day you'll see how mistaken you were. However, I hope that loans go well for you in the meanwhile. I noticed my parents in the rearview mirror as I was leaving. I didn't glance back as I stood in their doorway, appearing little and lost for the first time. Life has a humorous way of revealing people's true selves. I was having coffee with Kelly 6 months after Madeline's divorce when she paused, swirling her latte with extraordinary focus. Do you know anything about Madeline? She asked thoughtfully. After the lengthy talk with my folks, I shook my head. I had kept my distance and concentrated on starting over. Kelly went on. She moved back in with your parents. She is not employed. She claims that the divorce has left her too devastated to work, but she has been seeing a new man every week, based on what I've heard, as well as your parents. I interrupted to guess. They are totally behind her. Kelly gave a nod, covering all costs, her clothing, her automobile, and her evenings out. Even after those debts for the wedding, it didn't surprise me. Certain patterns are constant. Months passed. For the first time in years, I was able to concentrate on my primary career after quitting my second job. I began to look after myself. I purchased clothing that wasn't exclusively for work, took a yoga class, and had regular haircuts. People began remarking on how different I seemed. Then the phone rang. It was unexpected. It was Mom, speaking in a tiny, strange voice. I have something to tell you, Heather. I must apologize to you. I took a seat and prepared myself. Madeline. She got to know a rich businessman. Mom's voice broke. Yesterday she went out with him. She maxed up all of our credit cards before she departed, but we're not sure where. Each and every one. Between us, there was stillness. I started, Mom, but she cut me off. No, let me finish, please. Now your father and I are deeply in debt. We're not phoning to solicit money, though. We'll solve it on our own. That was something we ought to have done long ago. I wanted to apologize for everything. The apology was not flawless. It was something, but it didn't undo years of manipulation and favoritism. I have no idea where Madeline is these days. On holidays, I send quick texts to my folks. Happy Christmas. Cheers to your birthday. Cheers to the new year. It's shallow, but at the moment, it's all I can do. The problem with eventually escaping harmful patterns, however, is this. There's always something greater to fill the gaps in life. James and I met in a coffee shop near a bookshop 3 months ago. We struck up a conversation as he was reading my favorite book. In addition to being compassionate and accomplished in his own right, he sees me, which is the most essential thing, truly notices me. While organizing some old boxes last night, I came upon a picture of Madeline and me when we were kids. She was 5 years old. We were both grinning at the camera when I was 13, oblivious to what was about to happen. Despite my want to retain it, I returned it to its box. It's preferable to leave some memories behind. James is working on his laptop across from me at my favorite coffee shop while I type this, periodically looking up to smile at me. I came to a startling realization, occasionally. Getting everything you believed you wanted isn't the key to a happy ending. Sometimes it's about letting go of the things that have been preventing you from moving forward. Story 3. At 30 years old, I am now ready to tell this story, something I never thought I would be doing. My name is Erica, and this is how my life changed forever when I was 13. In those days, we were what you would call a normal family. In our cozy Maple Street house, Mom, Dad, and I live alone. Dad worked in construction, while Mom was a part-time bookkeeper. We were not rich, but we were happy. Everything fell apart when Dad had his accident. He was on his way to work one minute on a normal Tuesday morning. How about the next one? But he was gone, okay? It's that easy. Mom lost it. Completely collapsed. She would spend hours staring at nothing. I also needed to learn how to care for myself rapidly. One night, around 6 months after Dad passed away, Erica spoke to me. Honey, I must tell you something important. She was sitting at our kitchen table, tinkering with her coffee cup, as she often did when she was nervous. I met this person. Robert is his given name. He makes me happy again. I should have expected it. Really? She starts worrying about her appearance again as a result of the late-night phone calls. She had a mysterious mission to run, but when she told me that Robert and his 6-year-old daughter Sarah would be moving in with us, it still felt like a kick in the gut. But Mama, I protested. Dad passed away only half a year ago. Yes, darling, I know. She cut me off, speaking in the harsh tone I had started to hear more often. But life goes on. Robert is a kind man, and Sarah needs a mother figure. We can get back together as a family. A home. That's what she called it. She saw our house as if it were a fairy tale kingdom when Robert came in 2 weeks later with his kid and tons of stuff. Sarah was a little child with blonde pigtails and big blue eyes. This was the kind of gorgeous young girl my mother had always wanted. Look at her, Erica, Mom would remark as she watched Sarah color or play with her toys. Indeed, she is precious. She needs a lot of love and attention at this age. She does require attention. My mom was more than happy to put forth her best effort. She didn't appear to have anything left for me. As I watched my mother transform into Sarah's perfect stepmother, I vanished into thin air. I didn't really understand how things would operate until dinner. This woman, who would become my deadliest adversary, had been visited by Robert's mother a week or so after they had moved there. She looked at me and exclaimed, "Oh, you're such a big girl." Then she leaned over and squeezed my cheek so painfully that I felt like screaming. What a beautiful face. She explained how her fingers penetrated my skin like claws. But this home would be perfect. You know, Robert? Death. She didn't finish the statement, but she didn't have to. I saw the way she looked at me, like I was a stain on her son's new, immaculate family portrait. I found marks on my cheeks from the night she pinched me. But when I tried to show Mom, she just shook her head. Life did not fall into a routine when I was a mother. Robert and Sarah became a perfect little team that always cooperated, arranging movie nights, walking to the park, or just having a conversation over supper and cracking silly jokes about Sarah. Meanwhile, I was often dragged off to Mom's friend Janet's house. "Erica, my dear?" Without making eye contact, Mom would say, "Janet needs help with little Emily today. I assume you're okay with it?" When I visited Janet, at least one person seemed happy to see me. Emily was 4 years old and completely endearing with her vibrant curls and a smile that could light up a room with her gaping teeth. She would approach me as soon as I walked through the door and yell, "Eerie, Eerie." Playing with Emily was the highlight of my days. I would build blanket forts, throw tea parties with her stuffed animals, and make all the silly voices in the stories we read. Janet would come over, bring refreshments, and ask me about school every now and again while listening to my answers. It felt normal, and family should feel at home. It was a different story. Robert's mother, Mrs. Henderson, had almost moved in. That's how it felt, anyhow. Each time she provided suggestions for new paint colors, furniture moves, or critiques of the curtains, Mom jumped at the opportunity to make the change. "These walls should be eggshell instead of cream," she would say. The next thing you know, your mother is at the hardware store choosing paint samples. Moving the living room's furnishings is necessary for better feng shui. Mom insisted on moving heavy furniture, so she would spend the entire weekend doing it. However, her favorite hobby was still haunting me. She crushed my cheeks between her skeletal fingers, causing my skin to explode. Such poor table manners. She would squeeze harder and add, "I see you're still not holding your fork properly. You should have received more education from your mother." Or she'd spot me reading on the couch. "You can see how slouched she is. Her terrible posture makes sense. Squeezed. I will never see my Sarah sitting like that again." Robert was just as terrible in his own way. If I knocked over a glass or dropped a plate while doing the dishes, he would blow up. "Do you know how much it will cost?" he would scream. His face flushed. "Of course you don't. Have you never made a single dollar in your life? Just a freeloader who takes advantage of my work. I'm sorry." As I tried to repair whatever I had broken, I would mumble, "Sorry. It replaces things, doesn't it?" He would continue, "You live in my home, eat my food, and wear clothes that I have paid for. What do you contribute to? Nothing. Simply make messes and break things." Every time something similar occurred, I would turn to my mother in the hopes that she would speak. Anything. However, she would pretend not to hear and occupy herself with cleaning or fussing with Sarah. On my 16th birthday, I made up my mind. I would no longer be Robert's freeloader. That morning, I woke up early and went around the neighborhood handing out flyers I had made about my dog walking services. I had 3 clients lined up by the afternoon. "Do you wish to take dogs on walks?" 2 streets over, Mrs. Peterson. When I knocked on her door, she asked, "How come you teens have so much homework these days?" "I can manage both," I assured her, attempting to sound more confident than I felt. "I earn high marks and I'm very responsible with animals." She looked hesitant, but handed up her golden retriever's leash. "Anyway, all right, let's give it a shot. Max needs a stroll every day after school, $10 per stroll." That was merely the beginning. Because I was walking 5 different dogs, babysitting the Martinez twins on weekends, and aiding old Mr. Cooper with his grocery shopping, Janet formally hired me as Emily's after-school nanny, which was weird, given I've been watching her for free all this time. Anyway, I didn't spend any money on movies, chocolates, or anything else that other kids my age did. 3 months later, I had enough money to purchase the smartphone of my dreams. Just a simple model for sale, nothing extraordinary. It was mine, though. I was grinning the entire day I got it home. No one could claim to have paid for something that was completely mine. Sarah burst in without knocking, as I was in my room putting up the phone. As usual. "What is that?" She pointed to my phone and demanded. She had developed the inclination of coveting whatever she saw, and she was now 9 years old. I attempted to look unbiased as I said, "It's my new phone. I used money from my employer to acquire it." Sarah's gaze expanded. "However, I'd want a phone. Dad." Before I could stop her, she yelled for Robert and went downstairs. The sound of his heavy footsteps on the stairs made my stomach drop. "What's the matter, princess?" he asked from my doorway. "Erica's phone is the one I desire." Sarah glared accusingly at me while whimpering. My blood still boils when I consider what happened next. Nothing. Robert approached me, grabbed the phone, and gave it to Sarah. "My darling, Daddy has you covered. Ignore me completely," he whispered to her. My vision was fuzzy because I was so angry. The next day at school, I told Mrs. Collins, my English teacher, everything about the phone, Robert's constant teasing, and my mother's lack of concern. She listened to me silently and then escorted me to the principal's office. By that afternoon, Mom had been summoned in. Even though I wasn't there for the meeting, I could hear screams increasing. Mom's face was red with anger, but she was holding my phone as she left. She shoved at me without even looking at me. She clenched her jaws and said, "Here. I hope you're happy now." That night, after Sarah had been grieving for hours about losing her phone, Mom came to my room. "Would you dare?" she hissed. "Behind our backs, you have no right to behave in such a manner. You realize how humiliating it was." You are nothing more than a traitor." It was 2 weeks before she spoke to me again. She and Robert both pretended that I didn't exist, disregarding me as though I were non-existent, talking as though I didn't exist. At supper, they would carry dishes past me without even acknowledging me. The 2 years that followed were very much the same. I focused on my academics, worked at my jobs, and made an effort to stay at home. I threw myself into my studies because I knew that knowledge was my way out. When my senior year arrived, I submitted applications for every scholarship I could find. On the day the letter from State College arrived, I was so nervous that I nearly passed out. It wasn't until I was alone in my room that I opened it. My hands were shaking so badly I could hardly tear the package. "We're glad to let you know, Miss Thompson. It took 3 reads for the entire scholarship to sink in. They were giving me a full scholarship. I'd done it. I was going to college, so I wouldn't have to beg Robert for money, like an idiot. I thought maybe this would make them proud. This would ultimately allow Mom to see me again." That night, I waited until everyone was seated at the dinner table. "Mom, Robert, I have some amazing news." My heart started pounding. I was welcomed to State College. "What?" Robert's fork clattered on his plate. "You applied to college without telling me. Who do you think you are? Living in my house, eating my food, and making decisions like this behind my back. But it's a full scholarship." I tried to make it clear. "You won't be charged anything." "Damn you, I wouldn't pay anything," he spat. "Not a single penny for a bitter freeloader like you. Always sneaking around, always making plans." I looked at Mom in desperation. She was looking at her dish and moving food around with her fork. "Mom," I pleaded with you. "Please say anything. Why don't you stand up for me?" Her eyes were cold as she looked up. "Why should I? You've never shown any respect for this family. You have never accepted Robert. You've basically tried to destroy my marriage from the start. Be respectful." Something broke inside of me. The year's worth of rage and agony spilled out. Respect him. He is a bully and a terrible guy. There is nothing to be respected. The slap came as a surprise. Just 1 second. I stood there shaking with anger. The following time my face ached and Mom was in front of me. Still, she extended her hand. "Get out." First with a whisper, then louder. "Get out of my house." I rubbed the area of my face where she had hit me. I felt as though I was having a nightmare. I snatched up my rucksack in a daze and stuffed it full of whatever clothes I could find before running upstairs. My school papers, my phone, and the little cash I had saved. They'd have to leave the others. I could hear Sarah laughing and Robert yelling below, but it all sounded far away. 10 minutes later, I was on Jenny's front porch. Jenny, a classmate in biology. She was the first person I thought to call when she answered the door and saw my face, the backpack, and the tears that I hadn't even realized were falling down my cheeks. She didn't ask any questions. She just pulled me in and hugged me. As I sat in Jenny's kitchen, I worried about how I would manage college while essentially homeless. As soon as Aunt Maria came in, "I've been hearing Jenny talk about a girl named you," she said, looking at me up and down. "Do you require employment?" It found out that above her little Italian restaurant in the heart of the city, Maria had an empty studio apartment. Before I recognized what was happening, she gave me free meals and flexible hours around her lectures, saying, like it was no big deal. Although the apartment is clean and safe, it requires some upkeep. Working as a server taught me everything I could about the business. Maria was firm, yet fair, teaching me things that my business classes in college would not have covered. "See how the food keeps coming back from that table," she would add. "That's why we keep track of every complaint, every compliment." In our line of work, details are crucial. The flat was small, not enough room for a small refrigerator and a bed, but it was mine. No, Robert was the one yelling about freeloaders. No, Sarah must knock on the mail before entering. Mrs. Henderson's eyes were sharp. All I wanted was a private space to study, sleep, and finally breathe. By my final year, Maria promoted me to administrator. I got my business degree on a Saturday and went back to work on Monday morning. At the moment, scheduling, inventory, and employees are managed. I was promoted to manager 2 years later, and Maria told me, "You have a gift for this." She sat in her office looking happy but worn out. Jenny claims that you two have been talking about working together. I shifted in my chair uncomfortably. It's great, but we've talked about it. She cut me off since I'm retiring. Jenny needs someone with experience in this field, but she is getting a restaurant. Someone like you? My heart nearly stopped. Do you mean? I think the two of you should run this place together. Equal partners. You are the expert. She has a lot of passion. It might be a powerful mixture. Jenny and I spoke about it all night long. I spent the last few years saving as much money as I could. She also offered ideas for expanding the business and modernizing the menu. Her eyes were full with enthusiasm as she said, "We could do this. Please, Erica, do this. Consider it ours." So we did. I put everything I had, and together we turned Maria's traditional Italian restaurant into something that was all ours. 4 years later, we opened our second store across town. Sometimes taking a walk around our restaurants to observe how well kept everything is, I would think about my family. 11 years have passed since that evening. Mom slapped me and then threw me out. They were still in the city. I knew that even though we lived in separate worlds because I occasionally glanced at Sarah's social media posts. Now, one day, Jenny and I were in our office above the downtown location, surrounded by spreadsheets and expansion ideas, as we heard the gang making their way downstairs. "Looks like the engagement party is here," Jenny said, glancing at the booking calendar. "With 50 guests, the evening should be enjoyable." We started this tradition when we first took over the company. We would go up to customers and get their feedback. Make them feel special and unique. It was one of the things that set us apart from other places. I fastened my name tag on my branded jacket and said, "I'll go check on them." You sign these kinds of agreements with suppliers. The sound of clinking glasses and laughter increased as I descended the stairs. Such a sizable event might lead to repeat business. More bookings for events, maybe. I repositioned my badge and put on my finest work attire. After that, I saw them. My mother was seated at the head table. Her hair was perfectly styled, albeit it was grayer than I remembered. Robert, who looked the same but older, somehow materialized next to her. Sarah, too. Sarah was holding hands with a man in a sparkling attire and a gorgeous suit. My sister's engagement celebration. For a second I thought about going back, but before I could, Mom's eyes met mine, and I recognized her. "Well, look who it is." She made a big statement and attracted attention. "Our waitress for tonight." Robert's face twisted into a familiar frown. "I am 30 years old, and continue serving tables. I'm not claiming to be surprised." My mother cut me off as I was about to speak. "I always knew you'd end up like this." "Look at your sister," she said in a tone of delight. "A college-bound economist who is getting married to a wonderful man, and you're still wearing a name tag and taking orders." Sarah giggled and squeezed her fiancé's hand. "Maybe she'll do our dishes tonight, Daddy. Show us her special skills, the florist as well." Robert stood up, stumbling slightly. He must have consumed some alcohol. "Now, let's give her something to clean up." It passed by so fast. He grabbed one of the salad dishes off the table and tossed it to the floor. The collision caused everyone to jump. I felt a sharp pain and reached up to touch my cheek. My fingertips became red. "Boops?" Robert smiled as he saw the blood running down my face. "You'd best get him up, waitress." My blood was heating as I stood there with a trickle down my face. 11 years of hurt and anger were rising inside of me, and I was ready to tell them everything I had ever wanted to say. But before I could speak, Jenny's words diffused the situation. "I think this situation requires immediate attention." She carried our service agreement, which was leather-bound and had our restaurant's gold-embossed insignia, and she strode forward with the calm authority she had learned from her Aunt Maria. Jenny cleared her voice and addressed the room as per our service agreement. Section 3.2. Any customers who verbally or physically abuse our staff or property. You will be taken off the property right away. She paused seriously and gestured toward me. Mom's mouth fell open. "What are you talking about? Did you not know?" Was Jenny's smile really so sharp? "3 individuals, including co-owner Erica Thompson, are on the phone with you throughout the city." The silence that followed was deafening. I watched my mother's face lose its color as she looked around the eatery. admired the upscale clientele, the elegant furnishings, the framed reviews on the walls, and all the accomplishments she had never bothered to learn about. Yes, that is. That's impossible, Robert murmured, yet I could see the doubt creep into his eyes. Jenny emphasized that in the event of violence, we have the right to immediately terminate service without offering a refund. She turned to face me. Erica, it's your call. I adjusted my blazer, cleaned my cheek with my sleeve, and regained my voice. Make the tables understandable. I had control over our employees. All 50 visitors are now required to leave. Dishes and glasses were swiftly cleared away by the servant. That's when I heard the usual cry. Mrs. Henderson, Robert's mother, clutched her spaghetti dish tightly, as though it were made of gold. This isn't feasible, Mom yelled in the same way Mom used to scream at me about table manners and pinch my cheeks. This is my son's daughter's engagement celebration. Miguel, one of our waiters, tried to seize the plate, but she snatched it back, sending us flying. Help! Help! Someone is attacking me! Robert stumbled forward, his cheeks flushed purple with rage. Take your hands off of my mother! He took a step toward me. Fists crinkled, but our security team was faster. 2 more guards moved to keep us apart, after a third indicated that the police were already on their way. Sarah's tears were uncontrollable. Her perfect engagement party was ruined. Mom, do something. Mom just screamed and stood there. With mascara running down her cheeks, she appeared disoriented. The woman who had slapped me and thrown me out of my house was no longer able to look me in the eye. For the next half hour, there was chaos. The police arrived first and spoke with a number of witnesses who had taken video with their phones. Robert was brought out in handcuffs, still shouting threats. Before the ambulance arrived, a paramedic cleaned and dressed my face wound as guests poured out, whispering to one another. My phone rang 3 days after the event. Unknown person. Erica, Mom said, please don't hang up, in a softer tone than she had used at the restaurant. I waited without saying anything. Look at Robert, please. Law enforcement is filing charges. You have to let them go. He could lose his job as a result. No. I stated clearly and hung up. Within hours, the social media attacks began. Mom accused a vindictive restaurant owner of spoiling her lovely daughter's engagement celebration in her long and heartfelt first post. Remarks expressing sympathy for her parents and vowing never to dine at our restaurants. After that, Sarah wrote about her crazy stepsister, who couldn't stand her younger sister's joy. The message was immediately seen by local community groups. I was transfixed to my phone reading the lies when Jenny found me. Don't you believe we have it all on camera? Maria put up a security system years ago. It instantly records audio and zooms in when it detects aggressive movements or high-pitched yells. The video was pretty clear. Every phrase was heard. Mrs. Henderson's ranting, the plate mishap, Mom's insults, and Robert's threats. I posted a short message in the comments part of Mom's diatribe. This is what actually took place. Overnight, the video got viral. Other partygoers began posting footage of their phones. Miguel's effort to clear Mrs. Henderson's plate had been captured from the optimum viewpoint. Her face twisted in rage. Pasta sauce gushing in all directions. He never failed in his professional poise. Just one video received millions of views. Locally and subsequently nationally, drama in restaurants became popular. Food bloggers picked up the story. When a family showed up at their daughter's restaurant to interrupt an engagement party, it made headlines. In the comment sections, a number of readers related their own experiences with toxic parenting and familial estrangement. The consequences came right away. Robert's employer, already embarrassed by his imprisonment, could not ignore the widely circulated video showing him assaulting his stepdaughter at work. In quiet, they moved him to a lower position. The court found him guilty of assault and property damage. Mom tried to undo the harm by taking down her posts, but screenshots could not be undone. Sarah canceled her wedding because she didn't want to be associated with any controversy, which resulted to Mrs. Henderson becoming a meme. The spaghetti-making woman. On social media, her screaming face became viral. Noticing a spike in the number of views for the security film, I thought of a narrative I had told myself in the dark days after my mother's banishment. One day, everything would be different. One day, I would have the chance to reconcile with my family. Once they realized their error, they would try to set things right. But when I saw them in my restaurant that night and watched them try to make fun of me, I finally understood, even after all these years and all their success, some things cannot be fixed. Not every bridge is meant to be rebuilt. The fact that the video proved to be successful was not the only reason I kept it pinned to my profile. I placed it there as a reminder to myself and others that a good ending doesn't always depend on forgiveness and reunion. Sometimes you have to understand that it's okay to go and never come back. Story 4. Being raised in a family of restaurateurs, I soon discovered that food served as more than simply sustenance. It served as a legacy, an art form, and a potent unifying force. For 3 generations, my family had been supported by my grandmother's little noodle store in Chinatown. Observing Mom skillfully made shoes in the small kitchen changed the way I saw the world. "Do you recall me?" With her hand deftly folding dumplings, she would say, "One's heart is the source of good nourishment, not only the components." I take that advice to heart, spending many hours in the kitchen learning not only recipes, but also the business savvy that had enabled our family to get through difficult times. Nobody was aware that I was also working on an online master's degree. After the restaurant closed for the day, I stayed up late studying. I became proficient in the significance of using fresh foods and the delicate balance of tastes. I studied corporate finance, business strategy, and market analysis at night. I wanted to do more than just operate a restaurant. My goal was to transform the food sector. Then I got to know James. One wet Tuesday night, he came into our restaurant to escape the downpour. I was instantly drawn to him since he was tall, well-dressed, and clearly out of place. "What would you suggest?" he inquired. His pricey coat was shedding water. "Our braised meat with hand-pulled noodles." Without hesitation, I answered, "For a night like this, it's ideal." I felt my heart skip a beat as he grinned. "I have faith in your judgment." I saw him take his first mouthful 20 minutes later. He closed his eyes in joy after they had expanded in astonishment. They locked onto mine when they reopened. "This is amazing," he remarked. "It's unlike anything I've ever eaten." Our story started at that very moment. James started going 3 times a week and became a regular, always experimenting. We started talking about food, but soon we were talking about everything. He was employed by a large investment business in the financial industry. I intentionally left out my MBA and bigger goals when I told anecdotes about the restaurant. He made the proposal 6 months later. Easy and personal. The restaurant was just us. When he first tasted the noodles, he closed over a bowl. It was another matter entirely to meet his family. With a corporate empire that included hotels, restaurants, and real estate, the Chens were old money. Richard Chen, James's father, served as CEO of Chen Global Hospitality, one of the biggest chains of upscale hotels and restaurants in Asia. His sister, Amanda, served as the company's director of operations, while his mother, Victoria, epitomized old-world elegance. It was immediately apparent that I didn't match their ideal daughter-in-law. When we first met, Victoria's neatly styled eyebrows flared in a little eatery. How charming. Amanda's contempt was more obvious. "You can't be serious, James. Chen owns us. We don't own street food stars. We own restaurant chains." James stayed silent, despite squeezing my hand beneath the table. A warning sign. I decided to ignore the engagement. Dinner was a subtly humiliating exercise, hosted at the Imperial Palace, Chen's main eatery. They obviously thought I was an outsider. Across the table, my beloved Victoria called, "Your employment in the food service industry is intriguing. Do you employ chefs, or do you prepare everything yourself?" Before I could reply, Amanda said, "Be kind, Mother." She certainly makes the most of what she has. Not everyone has the funds to receive appropriate culinary instruction. Using my years of expertise in customer service, I remain calm. "My granny was my trainer." "Whoa, how adorable!" Victoria cut me off. "Recipes from the family." "Do you recall our Paris cooking session with the Michelin-starred chef, James?" James gave an uncomfortable laugh. "Please, Mother." However, their disdain wasn't the most agonizing aspect. James's silence was it. He never once stood up for me or our bond. They were unaware that I had earned an MBA with honors while running my little business, and created an app-driven food service platform that was set to transform the sector. Food Tech Solutions, my business, was already worth more than $3 billion. I had kept this a secret, working in stealth mode, since I wanted to be assessed on my character rather than my possessions. However, it became evident that the shackles would never accept me as the wedding preparations got underway. A family supper at Victoria's house was the tipping moment. I shared my heritage by bringing some of my specialties. Victoria looked at the containers and wrinkled her nose. "He brought takeout, I see." I proudly stated, "Actually, I made these myself. These recipes belong to my grandmother." Amanda poked her fork into the food. "How genuine. However, we should stick to appropriate catering for the wedding. We need to uphold our reputation." James was sitting next to me, glued to his phone. "The menu for the wedding has been decided." Victoria. "Paris-based in-house chef Pierre will provide the catering. At a chain wedding, we can eat street food. My food isn't—" I started, but Victoria held up a hand. "I am aware, my love, that the chains are more than just a family clothing line. Despite its attractiveness, your modest eatery falls short of our expectations. We might assist you in finding a better job after the wedding." It buzzed on my phone. It was a warning. Leaked quarterly losses and possible fraud in the restaurant division caused Chen Global Hospitality's shares to drop 30% in after-hours trading. Victoria became pale. Amanda wrote hurriedly, while Richard yelled commands via his phone. James palely turned to face me. I had to go for the workplace. Emergency in the family. Calmly, I stood. "In fact, I believe I can assist." Everybody froze. "Assist!" Amanda scoffed. Her voice faltered. "If you can't summon $500 million, your knowledge of noodles is irrelevant." I took my laptop out of my backpack. "I want to show you something, actually." Victoria gave a disdainful wave. I turned my laptop around to face them and politely interrupted. "My dear, this is hardly the time for Food Tech Solutions. Are you familiar with it?" Amanda's face lost its hue. She had, of course. Every significant participant in the hospitality sector was aware of the mysterious digital startup that was transforming restaurant operations all around the world. Richard narrowed his eyes and lowered his phone. "How about it?" I said plainly. "I started it 3 years ago. At the moment, it is worth $3.2 billion. Yes, Amanda, I can now generate the $500 million you require." There was a thick quiet in the room. James stared at me in shock. "However, you own a little eatery." "James, I run a lot of stuff. My passion is the restaurant. Where my business sense flourishes is at Food Tech Solutions." I look across at Victoria. 5-star restaurants all over the world now utilize menu optimization systems based on the street food dishes you ridiculed. Leaning forward, Richard's former contempt gave way to intense curiosity. "You claim to be the CEO of Food Tech Solutions, the business that all hospitality groups are vying for." I verified that our financials were being pulled up. "We intend to go public next quarter, but for now we're in stealth mode. Everything from inventory control to predicting client preferences is transformed by our AI technology, something your business is in dire need of right now." I pointed to their bleak financial report on Amanda's laptop. Victoria put down her wine glass, her hand shaking. "However, why didn't you inform us?" Her voice trailed off as she asked. "Or would it have changed anything?" "Would that have made me more deserving of respect?" I whispered. "Better suited to be a daughter-in-law? It says volumes that you're even asking." Anger flushed Amanda's face. "Do you think we'll believe you?" A $1 billion IT firm was secretly developed by a restaurant owner. I showed a screen with proprietary algorithms and patents. Outdated systems and manual inventory management are the root of your issue. My technique addresses precisely these problems. Richard's instincts for business took over. "We ought to talk about this in private. Maybe at the Imperial for supper." "No," I interrupted. "Here, we'll talk about it. Where I've been denigrated by you for months. You've stated unequivocally that I am unfit for your family." At last, James said something. "May, you told me, but why?" As I gazed at him, a deep melancholy began to creep in. Instead of defending me for what I am, I wanted you to defend me for who I am. However, you never did. Victoria made an effort to become better. You have to understand, darling. We have expectations? Indeed. You've stated those expectations clearly. I spoke aggressively. Let me set my now, Chung. The hotel industry is in danger of collapsing. There will be restrictions, but I can assist. Amanda's eyes became black. Situations? Now, Amanda, this is blackmail. It's business. I straightened my clothing and stood up. You have acted as though I am beneath you. You need my assistance now. Is your pride capable of that? Richard's voice became accommodative. Give your circumstances a name. First, your management has to be completely reorganized. You are not a skilled leader, Amanda sputtered indignantly as I looked at her. The second is the complete deployment of food technology solution systems on every property. You're losing money with your antiquated ways. Third, I persisted in publicly recognizing our collaboration and the fact that I, as the proprietor of that little eatery, preserved Chen's international hospitality. Victoria let out a gasp. We can't be expected to. I am able to. Your stock is plunging. You will have lost half of your market worth before morning. Already, your investors are demanding to see you. Could you please take my hand, James? Let's have a conversation. I withdrew. We must talk about our connection. James. The room fell silent once again. For months, your family has allowed me, my ancestry, and my work to be disparaged. You've sat silently, laughed with them, and never defended me. Your initial reaction, even tonight, was to go to the office rather than stand up for me. My eyes filled with tears, but I spoke calmly. A companion that just appreciates me for my affection is not what I need. When I had nothing, I needed someone to stand up for me. Victoria stood up, her poise faltering. Look here now. You can see this now. I interrupted her. I want acceptance for my true self. Rather, you have demonstrated your identity to me. Save your business and agree to my terms. Or let your pride to ruin it. I grabbed my belongings, including my unopened street food containers. You can't make up your mind till tomorrow morning. My group will communicate. I'm walking toward the door. Amanda yelled, You can't simply leave. Our legacy is this. I made one final turn. Indeed. And it's been run into the ground by you. You wouldn't be here if your attention had been on invention rather than judgment. James's stunned expression was the last thing I saw. Richard's calculating gaze and Victoria's shaking hands. The lady they had judged unfit was their only chance as the empire fell apart. Carmel occasionally carries takeaway cartons and recipes while dressed in a professional attire. I looked over our most recent ad data the next morning in my modern rooftop office with a view of the city. My phone was constantly buzzing. James, Richard's attorneys, and Victoria herself all left messages. Sarah, my helper, came in carrying a fresh cup of green tea. In the lobby is the Chen family, each and every one. I looked at my watch. 7:30 a.m., exactly on time. Then send them up after 10 minutes. Those 10 minutes were crucial. My grandmother's lesson in negotiating. She would tell them to wait. Any meal is seasoned with anxiety. They had undergone a dramatic change by the time they entered my office. Victoria had lost her aristocratic composure. Richard's face had the scars of a restless night, while Amanda's expensive ensemble appeared to have been hurriedly put together. James hovered near the rear, completely disoriented. The documentation is prepared. I pointed to the papers on the conference table and spoke without introduction. Let's get started. Richard, come on forward. I want to say preserve it before we begin. I cut you off. This meeting is for business. Not much more. Your business is losing value every minute. For the next 2 hours, let's concentrate on that. We carefully reviewed the terms. A 40% share in Chung Global Hospitality would be given to Food Tech Solutions in return for emergency finance and the complete deployment of our technology. A member of my staff would take Amanda's job as Director of Operations. Highway robbery is what this is. Richard glared at Amanda, silencing her as she stuttered. Calmly, I said, It's more than fair. Modern technology, instant financial security, and a relationship that will increase your market worth are all yours. In exchange, I received a share of a business that really needed to modernize Asian Victoria, who had been unusually silent, spoke at last. "What about James?" I slowly looked into her eyes. "James is not involved in this conversation. Personal and business affairs have to be kept apart. Your family never seemed to understand." James moved ahead. "Please, May, can we have a private conversation?" After giving it some thought, I nodded. 5 minutes. In my private office, the rest of you can go over the paperwork with my legal staff." James paced uneasily. "Why did you keep all of this from me? Would anything have changed as a result?" I inquired. "Would you have confronted your relatives earlier? Defended my small eatery from their unrelenting abuse? I was attempting to maintain harmony." "No, James, you took the easiest route possible. Every time I was humiliated by your family, my labor, my heritage, you decided to keep quiet." Everything was in the quiet. Frustrated, he raked his hands through his hair. "Mom, you are loved. Isn't that sufficient?" "James, love isn't love without respect. Convenience is the reason." I got to my feet. "The reason your family's business is in trouble is because they are unwilling to change and see the benefits of alternative viewpoints. You're not that dissimilar," he begged. "Give me another opportunity. I cut in on that issue now that I understand it. You only want another opportunity since you now know that I'm successful and affluent, but I'm still the same guy who proudly operated my small restaurant yesterday. You don't deserve to know this person if you can't love and respect that one." The paperwork was back in the conference room and ready to be signed. As Richard signed away 40% of his family's fortune, his fingers shook a little. As the documents were notarized, Victoria watched with tears in her eyes, and Amanda sat rigidly, hardly controlling her rage. I announced one last thing. "Another stuff. My grandmother's eatery. There is no price at which it can be sold. With your resources, it will undoubtedly continue to function just as it has for 3 generations. Victoria started. "My heart and my heritage are that restaurant. You look damn on everything. Everything you made fun of. And it will stay precisely the same. A reminder that success isn't always associated with premium brands or fancy labels." In the 6 months that followed, Chin Global Hospitality completely changed. Their operations were transformed by our air systems, which reduced expenses while enhancing service quality. In addition to recovering, their stock reached unprecedented heights. The tale was a huge hit with the media. An unexpected supply of modern technology saved a traditional family company. James attempted to visit the restaurant and sent messages and flowers. I had security graciously escort him out, returned the flowers, and left the messages unread. After being torched, certain bridges ought to remain burned. A year later, I showed my grandma the most recent financial statistics while we sat in her kitchen. Food Tech Solutions was now valued at more than $5 billion, while Chen Global Hospitality had doubled in value. "The broth belongs to Abbott." After sampling the day soup, she inquired. I grinned, realizing what she was saying. Numbers weren't the key to success. It was about remaining loyal to your heritage, your principles, and who you are. As usual, there was a long wait around the block, and the restaurant was crowded. Months earlier, Victoria had visited once, ostensibly to make apologies. Like everyone else, she stood in line. It left a substantial gratuity and sat quietly in a corner. The gesture was recognized, but she never came back. Unable to endure the disgrace of working under my management team, Amanda had relocated to Europe. Richard adjusted remarkably well, realizing at last that innovation and James needed to coexist with tradition. When I last heard from him, he was seeing a socialite who was favored by his mother. There are those who never learn. I myself divide my time between cooking noodles in my grandmother's kitchen and managing a multinational IT firm. They both made me happy in different ways. Both were equally significant aspects of my identity. A rich IT CEO, who still works in a tiny restaurant kitchen, is frequently questioned by the media about the differences between the two. The fact that the restaurant was more than simply a business was lost on them. It served as a reminder of my origins, identity, and priorities. A little girl came into the kitchen one evening when I was cleaning up the restaurant. "Are you the woman who now owns all those large hotels?" I gave her a freshly baked dumpling while grinning. "No, darling, I'm simply a woman who cooks delicious noodles. The rest is simply business." The Chens believed they were teaching me something about value and prestige. Rather, they acquired a painful lesson in pride and judgment. The most important things in life may occasionally be found in the most basic packages, and those who don't have to prove their strength are the most powerful, as my granny used to say. Good meal is not only about the ingredients, it's about the heart. Success is no different. Integrity, not simply assets, is the source of it. The takeout cartons from that final meal at the Chen home are still with me. They serve as a reminder at my office. Never compromise your principles or allow someone to make fun of you for who you are. For people who are unable to see your value, serving a cold food isn't always the finest form of retaliation. It's serving one that's been cooked to perfection. With a dash of karmic justice, a dash of prosperity, and a dash of grace. Story 5. My beloved son Ryan passed away, and we are saying our final goodbyes to him today. My husband Mike didn't even attend his funeral, which makes my heart hurt even more. I called him, heartbroken and frustrated. In stark contrast to my sorrow, his voice on the other end of the line was upbeat. Unaware of the pain in my voice, he said, "I'm in Hawaii for my parents' 70th anniversary." My mother was shocked when I told her, but her surprise soon gave way to rage. "What, is that in Hawaii?" Without hesitation, she decided to confront Mike and his parents after explaining, her face turning red. "I work in an office and am Emily, 40 years old. After 10 years of marriage, Mike and I have a son named Ryan. Ryan has been battling leukemia for the past 2 years, which has kept him in the hospital even though he missed the majority of his early school years. He would be delighted to have his classmates visit him. We were all inspired by Ryan's tenacity, and I found strength in his resolve. My parents visited Ryan every day and were there for him no matter what. My mother used to say that she eagerly anticipated the day when Ryan would be able to eat his favorite foods once more. My dad, though diagnosed with dementia a few years ago, also made frequent visits one day, mistaking me for a nurse. He said thank you for taking care of my grandson. His words were bittersweet. Though his memory of me faltered, his concern for Ryan remained unwavering. Ryan, wise beyond his years, understood his grandpa's condition and would kindly play along whenever my dad said something odd. Their bond was heartwarming, a sharp contrast to Ryan's relationship with his father. "Can't you visit Ryan, sometimes? Don't you care about what he's going through?" I once asked Mike, desperate for his support. His response crushed me. "Ryan doesn't like me, so it's better if I stay away. Besides, I'm really busy." It was true that Ryan and Mike didn't get along. Mike had never been involved in Ryan's care, not even when he was a baby. Ryan, understandably, grew distant from his father. Whenever Mike had free time, he chose to spend it with his own parents, who also showed little interest in their grandson's health. "How can he be so heartless?" my mom said, her frustration evident. "And his parents? Did they not care about Ryan at all?" I replied half-jokingly. Maybe I married the wrong person. I had fallen for Mike's kindness when we were dating, but he had become cold and indifferent to both me and Ryan. "If I'd known he was like this, I would never have introduced him to you," my mom said, regret coloring her voice. Mike and I had met through my uncle, who was friends with Mike's father. At the time, I wasn't seeing anyone, so I agreed to meet Mike. He seemed kind, and we hit it off. Before I knew it, we were dating seriously and eventually got married. But things changed after the wedding. Mike's parents, who had been warm and welcoming before, became controlling. My mother-in-law, who once greeted me with smiles, turned harsh. "You're part of this family now, Emily, and you'll do as I say. If not, we'll ensure you get a proper divorce." She once told me coldly, as I sit here now grieving for Ryan, "I can't help but wonder if I made a mistake trusting Mike and his family." I initially thought my father-in-law was a quiet man, but over time his true colors began to show. He often made insulting remarks, saying things like, "We only let you marry Mike because the head of our family introduced you. Otherwise, there's no way we would have let someone like you marry our son." At first, I didn't understand his disdain. My uncle, who runs a real estate company, had introduced me to Mike. Apparently, during the introduction, my uncle mentioned that I came from a wealthy family. This led my father-in-law to assume that my father owned substantial properties. That assumption fueled his condescending attitude. I hadn't heard any of this from my father or uncle, so I initially believed my father-in-law's comments. After Mike and I got married, we moved into the house where my maternal grandparents had lived. They had passed away, and the house had been empty for some time. My parents planned to rent it out to prevent it from deteriorating, but when Mike found out about the house, he pleaded with my parents. "I promise we'll take good care of it, so please let us live there," he said. "It's close to her family too, so we can help look after them." The arrangement made sense. The house was near both our families, which would allow us to keep an eye on our parents. However, having Mike's parents so close quickly became a burden. Mike would often invite his parents over and start bragging, saying things like, "Our house is so new, you must be jealous. It's so much bigger. Maybe even twice the size of yours." While his father seemed irritated by the bragging, his mother would smile and say, "We could live here together. It might be old, but it's better than our place." After one such visit, I asked Mike directly, "Are you planning to have your parents move in with us? This isn't even your house." He brushed it off, stating it was only a joke, but his mother's actions suggested otherwise. Not long after, his parents began coming often, examining the house as if they were planning to move in. Living here would be better than our poor abode. My father-in-law grumbled, one day, "At least there's no rent in this dump." I was outraged when he termed the place a dump, but my mother-in-law's actions were much worse. She disregarded me entirely while selecting out a place for herself. When Mike didn't speak out, I determined to put the record straight. "We're borrowing this house from my folks. My grandparents used to live here, so of course it's a bit old." I told my in-laws appeared astonished, but my father-in-law instantly reacted, "That's why it's in such horrible shape." His tone was contemptuous, and I believed the house was considerably superior than where they lived. My mother-in-law, however, accused me of lying. "I trust my son more than you." She stated her incredulity didn't change the facts, so I let the subject rest. I was still uncomfortable, concerned that they would force their way into the house. After I found out I was pregnant, that dread went away. Suddenly, there was no more mention of their moving in. Maybe they understood that living with us would entail assisting with the baby's care. My mother-in-law once told me that since Emily's parents live close by, they need to look after the child. I'm not going to do it. Her remarks hurt, even though I hadn't sought for her assistance. How she could be so unconcerned about her first grandchild was difficult to understand. When I mentioned it to my mother, she only chuckled. She said, "Leave the babysitting to me." Someone who doesn't want to look after a cute grandchild doesn't need to be asked. I chose to depend on my parents because she was correct. When my kid was born, my parents were ecstatic at the moment. However, my in-laws were only there once. Mike's response was unimpressive as well. It disappointed me much that he seemed unmoved by the arrival of our baby. In an attempt to soothe me, my mother added, "Don't worry. Mike will feel more like a parent once the child is a bit older." However, Mike lost interest in our child over time. Our son fell when he was 5 years old. The physicians determined that he had pediatric cancer after a number of tests. I was saddened because I thought Mike would help me get over this unthinkable situation. "Rather, you will have to pay for the medical care yourself," he stated icily. "I have no problem with that." His remarks devastated me, and I was left to deal with our son's condition and medical treatment by myself. My husband's behavior as a father infuriated me. His mother's remarks were far more hurtful than his enragement at his lack of sensitivity. "Ryan gets cancer since Emily passed on her genes," she hissed. "It must be her fault, because none of our relatives have anything like that." My father quickly defended me after hearing this. "Are you indifferent to Ryan? We will look after him ourselves." With a forceful and protective tone, he responded, "You can do whatever you want." My son's condition was already overwhelming me, but my father's support made my husband and in-laws discreetly depart. Everything was made more difficult by their nasty comments, but I was encouraged by my mother. "Try not to give up. You must be strong for Ryan. We will make every effort to assist you," she reassured me, and with my parents' support, I decided to put all of my attention on my son and stop depending on my spouse. I balanced Ryan's care with my job. I was always thankful to them for their selfless assistance, even though they were retired. At first, Ryan's condition improved despite his diagnosis, and he was able to lead a life that was nearly normal for a youngster. But my spouse didn't think Ryan's sickness was that bad. Is Ryan truly ill? Or are you only attempting to deceive me? One day, as he watched Ryan play joyfully, he asked. I disregarded his unfounded charges. There was no use in arguing with him. As time went on, my husband retreated to his parents' home and spent less and less time there. He brought nothing except complaints, so it was odd that his disappearance made things easier for me. My parents filled the void by taking turns looking after Ryan. My spouse, meanwhile, appeared to be losing interest in our son's life. Only until Ryan was admitted to the hospital 2 years ago did he start to visit the residence more often. Casually, he would remark, "Leave the housework to me." "By the way, why don't you just give me this house?" he would say, grinning. I chose to disregard his comments, but it was obvious that the property was more important to him than Ryan. Like a threatening cloud, his plans to move live with his parents hung over me. My mother and I were always busy taking care of my father at this period, since he had been diagnosed with dementia. My father's illness was unnoticed by my spouse and in-laws. They didn't even appear to notice my father's periodic visits. My spouse casually said, "Your parents were here earlier." One day, they were only aimlessly strolling. Will they not assist with Ryan? I was annoyed by his easygoing tone, but I ignored it, too tired to describe the worsening of my father's dementia. My uncle started coming around more frequently. He often had serious conversations with my mother. My mother simply provided evasive answers when I questioned her about it. I was concerned, but Ryan's condition deteriorated before I could think about it. Even though I had prepared for this, the actuality was too much to handle. My father's health is deteriorating, and my husband is untrustworthy. My mother was my main source of support. I was astonished by my husband's reaction when I told him about Ryan's declining health. "I'm currently really busy. Don't call me anymore. You deal with Ryan's predicament," he remarked contemptuously. I was driven to my breaking point by his lack of parental responsibilities. I started thinking about breaking up with him. The sadness was severe shortly after Ryan's death. My mother and uncle filled in, making sure that Ryan could be by his side until the very end, because I couldn't bring myself to handle any of the arrangements. Right before the funeral, where Mike and his folks were, my uncle started to freak out. "The funeral cannot be skipped, can it?" His voice rose in exasperation as he spoke. I contacted my hubby when I noticed his worry. "You're where?" "It's time to bid Ryan farewell." With a quivering voice, I spoke. "My parents' anniversary is being celebrated at the party I'm at." He heard his voice and cheerfully replied, "I told you not to call me right now." Angry, my mother's face flushed. She clarified that he was in Hawaii. My uncle, clearly incensed, acted immediately. Even though I knew my husband would take a vacation rather than attend our son's funeral, I still didn't have high expectations for him. Fury filled me up. "You went on a trip even though you knew Ryan was in critical condition." My voice trembled as I spoke. "I'm sorry Ryan has a dad like you." I hung up while my mother consoled me, tears running down my cheeks. "I'll never be able to forgive them. Do not be concerned," she said cryptically. "Everything will be gone by the time they return from Hawaii." But I didn't understand what she was saying. I was too tired to ask them questions. With the help of my mother and uncle, the funeral was a success. But after that, I was at a loss. Ryan had taken center stage in my life, and I was at a loss for what to do next. "Emily, let me handle the future. Return to your parents' home and relax." I followed my uncle's advice. I went back home and took some time off from work to assist with my father's care. I was relieved that my employer was understanding and gave me a longer break. My husband then gave Emily a call one day. "I am unable to enter the house. Have you replaced the locks?" "It's terrible to change them without warning," he said in a panic. Calmly, I said, "I didn't change the locks. But don't call me anymore because I'm going to break up with you." Shortly after I hung up, he called once more. "It's more frantic now. The house where my parents lived was destroyed. A piece of land is up for sale. Register. What's happening? He yelled. I interrupted him by saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Ask my uncle. I asked my uncle, though. He invited me to come see what was going on at my in-laws' house, and he seemed pleased. Intrigued and nervous, I followed directions. My husband and his parents were standing outside, looking completely stunned when I got there. What does this signify? My dad-in-law made a demand. We lost our house. Is this because you were not taken to Hawaii by us? Did you destroy the house because you were angry? I couldn't understand the charge. That's not something I could ever do. I was busy grieving my son and arranging his funeral. I retorted, frustrated by the absurdity of her claim. Just then, my uncle and mother arrived. My mother's expression was cold and resolute. People who didn't even attend their own grandson's funeral have no right to complain, she said, her voice sharp. You should reflect on your actions. Mike and his parents fell silent, but the silence didn't last. My father-in-law quickly recovered and began ranting. You can't just demolish the house and sell the land. I'm the owner of that property, he shouted, brandishing a document. His declaration made me pause. Could he be suffering from dementia as well? He proudly showed us a contract bearing my father's signature, claiming that my father had transferred the property to him. But the document looked suspicious, hastily done, and amateurish. To make matters worse, it stated that the property had been given away for free, an impossibility. This contract isn't valid, I said, my voice steady. And for the record, my father suffers from dementia and cannot make sound decisions. Mike and his parents insisted the contract was legitimate, claiming they were unaware of my father's condition. My father is not the owner of this land, my mother interjected firmly. The property is registered under my name. You must have coerced him into signing this. Her words shocked me, but they clearly unnerved Mike and his family even more. My uncle stepped forward, producing detailed land records and a lease agreement. This land and building both belong to Emily's mother. You were renting the property from us, he said, his tone stern. You stopped paying rent months ago, ignored our attempts to meet, and left us no choice but to terminate the lease and put the property up for sale. Mike's parents stared at the documents in stunned silence. Were we behind on rent? My father-in-law asked, turning to my mother-in-law. I thought it was fine since we're related to Emily's uncle, he muttered, caught off guard. My mother-in-law confessed. We were planning to trick your father into giving us the land, so we didn't think paying the rent was necessary. Her disclosure left me enraged. They had a plot to use my father's sickness from the very beginning. While I struggled to digest this information, Mike took out another contract, looking remorseful. Is the house we live in also your property? Does this contract mean nothing to? He inquired, his voice tinted with desperation. The document in his hand, just like the first for my father signing. It was evident Mike had constructed a false document, assuming our home belonged to my father as well. How foolish, my mother replied, shaking her head. You tried to mislead us without even establishing who owned the land. It's ludicrous. Mike, and what about the life insurance payout from your son? She asked. Mike was clearly